Hello and good evening to everybody. Very, very welcome to our penultimate paper in Conversations Across Continents. This evening, I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Lianming Wang, who's talking to us this evening from Freiburg, where he's currently Balzan Fellow at the university there. And at the same time, he's Global Humanities Visiting Professor of East Asian Art and Architecture at Cambridge. And until recently, Dr. Wang, if I may, I'll call you Ming from now on, was also visiting professor at the Kunsthistorisches Institut in Florence. And before that, he taught at both Heidelberg and the Würzburg universities. One of Ming's main areas of research is the arts and culture of the early modern period, and especially the transcultural exchanges that took place between Europe and China. This interest has produced studies on the pivotal role of the Jesuit missionaries in China in the spheres of art, architecture, and of particular interest to us, of course, plant transfers, garden design, and water engineering in religious and imperial gardens in Beijing in the 18th century. Some of you may have been lucky enough to hear the paper Ming gave on the Jesuits' water engineering at the conference on Chinese gardens held at Sheffield in 2017. This evening develops the research discussed on that occasion with a paper that's going to be fascinating, not only because it demonstrates that China was as interested in Western gardens as the West was in Chinese gardens, but also because it brings a particular set of agents into the spotlight of our study of how garden ideas have been crisscrossing the world for quite some time. Ming, we're very, very grateful to you for agreeing to give this paper, and now I'll hand over to you.
Okay, can you hear me well?
Certainly can. Yeah,
okay.
Certainly can.
Okay. Thank you, Pipa. And okay, I have to. Okay, here we go. I really appreciate for this kind introduction, and thank you for having me here today for the online session. The paper I'm going to present is actually based on and actually inspired by a research seminar organized by the Max-Planck Society of History of Art in Florence many years ago, entitled Water Forms, History and Semantics of an Element, organized by Professor Alexandru Nova, Dr. Hannah Grindler, and Dr. Stefanie Hanke, 2016. So parts of the results have already been published in my book on Jesuit legacy in early modern Beijing. I will come back to the book at the very end of my talk today. And I'm planning to turn my paper into a modified English version with some updates. So I really appreciate if you can give me some insights and some critical comments. And in the next 40 minutes, approximately, maybe less than 40 minutes, I'm very happy and excited to introduce some of the key results within this seminal theories. And I very much forward to your responses. So entitled Jesuit Hydrology and the Making of a Qing Political Landscape, this talk demonstrates that the cosmological and religion visions of both Taoist and Buddhist embedded in early Chinese water devices penetrated the ways in which Qianlong Emperor conceived his decades-long project of water palaces in Beijing. And it will be argued that this encounter with Jesuit hydrology provided the major technical and cultural impetus to achieve and transform the water palaces into a Qing political landscape, which went far beyond the desire of a Chinese Occidenterie. So here we go. I will approach the topic today from the following 4 parts. And let's go into the first part, the sacredness of water. Although the words are often synonymously used, the European term landscape, now the left-hand side, that captures a picturesque moment, or in the word of François Julien, quote, a view from a part of a territory, is by no means equivalent to the dialectic of one of the Chinese terms stands for landscape, mountain water, shanshui, which is a notion that stands for a representation of nature. On the right-hand side, you see the Chinese characters. But in fact, the mountain water dialectic was not challenged until the 18th century, when European sciences, particularly the integration of linear perspective in landscape painting, entered Chinese frame of reference. so kind of late until the 18th centuries. Taking water as an example, my talk today attempts to discuss the divergence, intersections, and intertwined moments between the concepts and manifestation of Sino-European landscape as exemplified in a specific case from the late 18th century. Okay. Known as Western lenses, a large number of colored prints and handmade perspective drawing with so-called landscape designed to be viewed through an optical peep box were made both for Chinese domestic and Western markets in the 18th century. They are, as you can tell from the screen, picturesque vistas, garden scenes, or urban sites. The one on the left-hand side is a cabinet in the Kobe City Museum, and the upper right actually shows a church interior, which is extremely interesting, considering the context of making this color scheme in 18th century Beijing. Among these optical views I just mentioned, one that survived from in the Kobe City Museum in Japan, a so-called, with quotation mark, a European landscape with a focused gaze on the foreground of the Chinese Stein fountain challenges our previous knowledge about the popularity of European waterworks in the late 18th century. What unprecedented about this view is a theme which gives a focused gaze on water and the singularity of the water feature within a territory, all of which is enhanced by the perspective projection, the European way of constructing a landscape. This constructed view was formally identified by Japanese scholars as a picture of multi-story building with fountain, and recently by Christina Kloiktem, an art historian at Washington University in St. Louis, as, quote, a view of a foreign city, end of quote. It was believed to represent an unknown European cityscape, such as those commonly seen in Dutch or Lower Countries prints, as characterized by its giant towers with finials, the Renaissance idea of exhibiting grandeur of dimensions through access. So very European idea of representing the space. An important work of such kind of architecture that so far has not received enough attention as source for making this view, but that might allow Chinese commoners to get a sense of how European buildings and fountains looked, was Qianlong Emperor's European palaces constructed between 1747 and 59. Although the access to this compound was restricted to the emperor and his extended inner circle and foreign envoys, temporal stage corresponding to various vistas from this garden site were arranged in Beijing's public space during the ceremony surrounding Emperor Qianlong's 18th birthday in 1791. Surprisingly, according to the commemorative scroll now on the left-hand side, 3 European stage fountains were exhibited outside the city gate of the imperial city of Beijing, and the middle one that you can tell from the screen on the left-hand side now, configured in the form of Chinese pavilion with a golden tent roof floating over a colorful cloud and guarded by auspicious cranes at the corners of hexagonal basin, records immediately the fountain in the aforementioned optical view in the Kobe City Museum, now on the right-hand side. The resemblance between those two fountains is striking and further confirmed by the printed version of the birthday celebration scroll, now on the screen, published afterwards, in which the middle fountain is specified as follows. I'm not going to read all the citation, but just let you know that there is a very interesting sentence describing the fountain, the middle fountain. It says, here the view of the streams following through the pavilion's eaves and lattice windows is reminiscent of the celestial dewdrops being collected by the copper cast pillar with the statues of immortal on its top with copper-made bowls in the Han Dynasty palaces, a description which is extremely weird. So what exactly is a copper casted pillar with the statues immortal on its top? So what is significant about here, this description, is that the fountain clearly corresponds to the idea of auspiciousness and a desire for immortality rooted in early Chinese thought. The celestial dewdrops collected by the immortal status reference actually the Emperor Wu of the Han's Garden of Spring Forest in the 2nd century BCE, in which 2 water devices were constructed for pursuing immortality and auspiciousness. This refashioned a kind of old idea from the Han Dynasty, 2nd century BCE we're talking about. As recorded in written sources, one device from this garden used for collecting rainwater and dewdrops is a status of immortal holding a copper mug, was situated on an elevated platform in front of one of the Emperor Wu's palaces in the 2nd century BCE. And the wish was that he could become immortal. The emperor could become immortal after drinking the collected rainwater mixed together with jade scraps. And another one consisted of 2 copper dragons spouting water to the heavenly pound. So we're talking about 2 water devices in the Han Dynasty. But they're now on the screen on the left-hand side, you see an immortal holding a copper mug rebuilt by the Qianlong Emperor in the 18th century, so erected in 1771. In the Emperor Wu's case, the control of water, which was held to be a privilege of earthly rulers, was given a central place, both symbolically and physically due to its association with the sign and approvals of heaven. The control of water, dragons, and heavenly powers are the 3 symbols that intertwined in early Chinese thought, though immortality and emperorship had a persisting impact on the view of water, and were again reconfigured in the political narrative of Qianlong Emperor's 18th birthday celebration in 1791. They were again noticeably reconstituted through the Europeanized view in the Kobe optical view, now on the left-hand side, discussed it at the beginning of our talk today, in which water unprecedentedly became the primary subject of a part of a territory, or what nowadays we call landscape. So the landscape, with its golden pavilion splashed by the statue dewdrops, echoes Emperor Wu's vision of an immortal dwelling, now used to express the Qianlong Emperor's wish for longevity, and the copper dragons echo the auspicious sign of the Manchu rulership. And this amalgamated vision of water became common in the 18th century, as demonstrated by a Guangzhou, a Canton-made mechanical clock ordered by the Qing court. Now on the right-hand side, you see the clock, which is according to my research, is a 3-dimensional equivalence to the Kobe optical view. Rain pavilion and early Chinese fountain. As a matter of fact, medieval Chinese hydraulic spectacles also claim a central place within the imperial parks. In Constantinople, in the capital city of Eastern Roman Empire, an aqueduct system was used in summer to channel water to the roof of the palaces, as recorded in the Old Book of the Tang in China. The textual sources states that the scattered water streams in all directions from the roof create water screens that enable people to pass torrid summer in a leisurely way. Referred as a rain pavilion, 自雨亭, this water system first appeared in the private estate of Wang, the chancellor of Emperor Xuanzong in Chang'an, nowadays Xi'an, and then was also constructed at the shore of the Dragon Pound in his garden. So you can see on the screen here the Dragon Pound, and the rain pavilion was set to build at the shore of the Dragon Pound, but we don't know exactly where it is located, but it's at the shore of the Dragon Pound. Water wheels was used to lift the water to the basin placed on the roof of the palatial building. The water was then splashed out in summer once the wheel turned on in order to make, quote, one feel like in autumn, end of quote. Although this legendary device was not preserved, we learned from Wilhelm von Rupprecht, a 13th century Franciscan missionary, about a similar device in the capital of the Mongol Empire. According to him, Merkut Khan had a wine fountain in the capital built in the form of a silver tree. Grape wine, rice wine, and honey would pump to the top of the tree through the tubes hidden in the trunk and spread to the ground in 4 directions through the tubes hidden in the trunk and through the statues of the serpents installed at the top. So you can see here, I'm not sure whether you can see my mouse. Here the serpents, heads of serpents serve as the water outputs. These unusual water devices attracted a great deal of attention among Europeans and were recaptured in the 18th century print published in Pierre de Bégueron's Voyage fort précisément en Asie. In a scroll by Chinese Yuan dynasty court painter Wang reproduced in a copy dated 1312, but most likely a later copy from the 16th century Ming court, the Tang dynasty, the medieval emperor's residential palaces are imagined in great detail. The Rim Pavilion on the left-hand side is interestingly described or represented as a multi-storied octagonal building with a basin on its top, as you can see here, which provides an early technical possibility for Qianlong's so-called stage fountain. But what makes this so interesting is that here's attention has been given to the water lifting devices structure, which is a mechanical device consisting of transverse wheels. You see here, there are transverse wheels and gears are being used to lift the water from the ground. In fact, transverse wheels were practically used not in water lifting devices or structures, but rather in windmills, revealing the limits of the painter's knowledge of hydraulics. On the right-hand side, you see a very typical example that water lifting devices with transversal wheels were not introduced to China until the 17th century. But now on the right-hand side, you see a Chinese copy of Agostino Ramelli's Le diverse artificiose macchine, published in Paris in 1588, but translated by Jesuit missionary Johannes Schreck in the 17th century, together with his Chinese colleague Wang. So this kind of water lifting system was made known among the Chinese in the first half of the 17th century. The flying eaves of the roof of the Rim Pavilion are designed as water outputs in the form of a dragon's mask, as seen in the case of early Chinese copper dragons, and corresponds to the water spouting golden pavilions captured both in Qianlong Emperor's birthday celebration scrolls and in the Kobe optical view now on the right-hand side. So at this point, one might ask whether Qianlong Emperor's stage fountain at some level recapitulates the ancient idea of Rim Pavilion, and the answer is yes. So moving forward, the viewer's attention is further drawn to a huge dragon mask, I hope you can see here, over the suspension bridge, spouting waterfall-like strands from the peak of the cliff and filling a body of water, conceivably either the dragon pond or the heavenly pond. So this is to say that in the mind of the painter of this scroll, it was crucial that medieval Chinese hydraulic devices still aligned with those concepts from the Han Dynasty from the 2nd century BCE. And this desire seems to have persisted into the 18th century as exemplified by our Kobe example. It is certain that a counter with European hydrology provided a more advanced technical path for achieving this, albeit in the guise of the early Chinese symbolism of water. In his Craft of Gardens, Yuan Ye, a milestone in the history of Chinese garden manuals, Ji Cheng explores the ways of using rainwater for creating water landscape by making a mountain stream, a winding stream, and waterfall, emphasizing the feeling of delight in nature. On the left-hand side, you see one page from his book, The Garden of the Craft of the Garden from the 17th century. Indeed, digging the tank on whose top a stone dragon head was used to spurt water, which was in his view vulgar and unacceptable unacceptable for literati taste. Literati was actually, they are scholar officials in China in the 17th century, active in the Jiangnan area. And Jiteng recommended a way of making a waterfall that gave garden visitors a sense of actually being in nature. So nature instead of artificial. Unlike the Rim Pavilion, Jiteng, his waterfall did not include any water lifting devices, but simply an aqueduct and a gravity-driven fountain, which required a tank installed on the top of a rockery that needed to be filled manually by servants in order to create the illusion of natural scenery. So on the right-hand side, you see a 17th century rock stone tube installed on the top of the rockery to create the illusion of natural scenery. As opposed to his conventional literati taste that emphasized the water natural delight, Wang Tingner, a wealthy Huizhou merchant, managed to erect a water device within his private estate, which presented a completely different way of positioning and incorporating water into taint nature. As documented by a contemporary illustration, as you can see now on the screen, one can see an enclosed garden yard built on an elevated platform. You can see here, here's the platform. So this garden yard, enclosed garden yard, is built on an elevated platform in which a device gushing a jet of water is installed. Known as spring gushing to haven, the water jet shoots out from the mouth of a dragonfish, you can see here, and which is the ninth thumb of the dragon, and at the same time, dragonfish is a water god, preventer of fire disaster, and object worship in Emperor Wu's palaces of Cyprus Bean in the 2nd century BC. So it is difficult to tell, though, whether Wang Tingner, the Huizhou merchant, who claimed to have a close relationship with the Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci in the 17th century, was really inspired by European hydraulic treatise for designing such as this. We don't know about it, but because he claimed he had a very close relationship with Matteo Ricci, but Ricci never mentioned him in his diary. But the elevated ground suggests that the spring water was most properly lifted, not fitted by the aquifer. And his fountain indicates great interest and keen interest in observing the movements of pumped water recreate Emperor Wu's water devices on a much smaller scale. Although the dragon was replaced by dragonfish in this case, the desire for immortality, authority, and wealth remained unchanged. Parallel with an increased interest in pursuing water's poetic and artistic potential, the implantation of place of water in garden space has become fashionable among the Ming literati, particularly in the 17th century. Based on Sima Guang's description of his garden of pleasure and solitude, Qiu Ying, the court painter, dedicated the first scene of his scroll to the chamber of playing water, Nong Shui Xuan, as you can see now on the screen. The scene corresponds to the following passages on the winding stream dated 1070 in the 11th century. Quote, the water then flows out from the basin to the yard by passing the terrace at the north side, which imitates the form of elephant trunk. The building with its two streams encircling its four corners was hence named the Chamber for Playing Water. Sima Guang's water chamber is iconic for three major reasons. First of all, the chamber itself served indeed as a social center where literati gathered for the winding stream ritual every year. Secondly, the controlled water mirrored traces of movement in nature, or charged with literati emotion, which was intentionally designed to evoke the muses and aid artists in the making poems, paintings, and calligraphy. And third, a pavilion was erected for the sole purpose of observing the beautiful place of water, which established the world as a type of garden landscape to be viewed emotionally experienced as a single scene, Jing. So I put the word Jing here, but the better translation for Jing, as recommended by Stephen Whitman, a senior lecturer at the Cosmological Institute of Art, is better to translate as scenic sight instead of single scene. The idea was that while viewing the place of water, mental picture would arise, touching the viewer's emotions, and those images could be stimulated by the viewer's own visual and sensorial experiences, like the memories of the sound or taste of the water, for example. And this fashion paralleled the movement of Ming Dynasty grand tours of the literati, when a natural spring gradually became well-visited spectacles and sources for inspiration for pictorial and poetic creation. So what is a Jing, a view in Chinese sense? Pavilion or chambers were often built on the opposite side of a river for the purposes of rest, amusement, or purely for observation of traces of water, as illustrated in Xiaomi's watching the spring in a thatched hole. In this leaf, however, water does not achieve the role of a subject matter, but rather is depicted as an object, subordinating the mountain to the mountain water dialectic, captured by the viewer's subjective moment, which is the guy, the man here, the protagonist resting in the thatched hole. In transferring this moment to the garden setting, it becomes the emotion evoking Jing. The Chinese term stands for landscape. We'll come back to this issue later on. At the first spring of Jinan's 72 famous spring, the water jets of the Baotu spring were said to have reached heights of up to several meters. There is a Ming Dynasty in the 16th century, waterside chambers and a pavilion for watching the waves, Guanlanting, were built on its west bank. Along the lines of Sima Guang's water chamber, it is noteworthy that the observation of water through a fixed standing point or defined space was gradually established in the Ming garden spaces. Owning a spring fountain like the Baotu spring was not only considered a status symbol, but also a manifestation of literary taste, and was meant to indicate the level of cultivation of its garden owners. In achieving this, it is essential to acknowledge that the circulation of European and Jesuit hydraulic treatises in Beijing and Jiangnan area might have a good deal of impact on this process. In 1654, Tan Qian, a literatus from Hangzhou, described his encounter with a fountain placed in the garden of the Jesuit Xitang, which is one of the major Jesuit residences in Beijing, which has incorporated one of the water lifting devices introduced in Johannes Schreck's treatise. So on the left-hand side, you see 19th century ground plan of the Jesuit compound that I found in the Archive of Congrégation de la Mission in Paris, but the majority of the structure remained unchanged. So remained unchanged in the 19th century. Still, based on this, we are able to reconstruct the Jesuit compound of this 18th century, mid of the 18th century, roughly saying 70-50, now on the right-hand side in a three-dimensional way. And you can see here at its northeast corner, there is a garden compound impacted in third, located here as an essential part of Jesuit residence. From the step of Tan Qian, there is another one, Huang Biao, a local governor from Suzhou from the Jiangnan area, elaborated in 1688 the garden's engagement with water. Quote, there are waterside pavilions and ponds, including the pavilion for playing water, Wan Lan Ting, which is end of quote, which is the idea adopted from the concept of fixed point observation that flourished in the Ming Dynasty, as I just mentioned before. In the same travelogue, Wang further claimed to have witnessed 2 pounds equipped with waterworks placed at both sides of the water pavilion. The left one supposedly was an artificial waterfall or a European-style fountain, while the right one was a fountain with spring streams. Both places of water can be found in Georg Andrea Böckler's Architettura Curiosa Nova, which were available in the 18th century Jesuit libraries in Beijing. Some of the Böckler's illustrations are known to have been on view in Jesuit residences. In 1720, when a Korean traveler, who is an envoy sent by the Korean king, named Li Qizhi, who visited the Xitang Jesuit residences in Beijing, while he visiting this residence, he described the subject one of these copper plate prints as follows, quote, "One can see rocks among the flowers and trees. The water strands are issuing forth from the top of artificial rocks, about 2 or 3 jumps. Remember, 1 jump is equal to 3.30 meter, which means so the water streams is about 9 meters high and scattering like drops and fogs in all directions, splashing like a light drizzle on the flowers." So this is what Li Qizhi described, which corresponds closely to the illustration "Eine schöne Brunne, darin sich ein Narzissus befindet" on the right-hand side in the 3rd volume of Böckler's Architettura Curiosa Nova. And in the same volume, according to my research, there are 3 other illustrations also described by Li Qizhi in great detail. Underlying the shadow of the mountain water dialectic, water rarely achieved the role of a primary subject matter in the pictorial representation of nature. But in landscape architecture, the story was a bit different. Stimulated by the Iraqi elite culture in which spring and natural spectacles were being aspired to, mythology of the water established itself as a key feature of a Qing, picturesque view of the garden landscape, independent from mountains, but embedded into the viewer's mental picture and sensory experiences. The encounter with Jesuit hydrology might have given the major technical impetus to achieving this, as connection to this technology are also demonstrated in a number of artificial fountains that were constructed in the Qing imperial gardens. Now let's turn into the last part. As a matter of fact, the Jesuit concept of water claimed a central place in the Qianlong's European palaces erected in the garden of eternal spring of garden of rounded brightness. We will come back to this name again later on. Most of these buildings called water palaces. So the description of this palace is kind of interesting. In the Qing imperial archive, they are generally described as water palaces, Shuifadian, by the court during construction. And they were mainly intended for, according to my research, for enjoyment of delight of nature brought by harmonious place of water. And slightly before the water palaces were erected, the pursuit of delight in nature was considered as the ultimate principle of waterworks in the Emperor Yongzheng's garden compounds. So Yongzheng is the father of the Qianlong Emperor. And there were at least, according to research, there are 7 to 8 hydraulic devices or water palaces with heightened tin pipes and pumps, reproducing famous garden or natural scenes from the southern provinces. One, this was believed to an artificial cascade implemented among the rockeries of the magnificent view of the western mountain peak Xifeng Xiuse on the screen, imitating the compelling view of Mountain Lu's waterfall. So what you are seeing now is not a natural scenery, but a view greatly benefited by Jesuit hydrology by using the tin pipes and water lifting devices. In line with Zhicheng's, the 17th century garden theorist, Zhicheng's literary view, the morphology of the water in the early stage of this garden followed the rules of nature, delight in nature. And this view was soon challenged by his son, the Qianlong Emperor, through the water palaces constructed in the subsequent two phases. Planned and built by Italian and French Jesuit as well as the Chinese court artists, architects, this building were designed as a space for displaying Qianlong Emperor's Sino-European collections and a showplace of European exotica, in particular, the Qing mastery of European waterworks. That was main purposes of building this kind of water palaces. The compound contains 6 major palaces embedded with European waterworks, including the Palace of Harmony, Wonder, and Delight. So again, the name of this water palace is something interesting. It's called Xie Qi Qu, literally means the Palace of Harmony, Wonder, and Delight. So why did this palace have a strange name? Its main building contained a curved linear-shaped water basin with varied places of water on its front and a single 3-storied monumental fountain at its rear. Water was channeled through the 3 major tunnels and connected with a 2-storied water reservoir building driven by a water lifting device to its northwest. So you can't see the water reservoir building, but actually it's connected with that building, which is located about 5 minutes by walk, so 2 minutes by walk. It's not far away from this building. When viewing the fountain from a wooden throne placed on the terrace, I hope you can see my mouse here. Here is a wooden throne placed on the terrace where the emperor is supposed to sit. The fountain could be seen to feature a row of combating bronze animals, you can see here, which enhance the theatrical effect of the water features. The Qing of the water scenery crystallized in a synthesis of harmony, wonder, and delight, as the name suggests, was a feeling of, quote, leisurely rhythm, end of quote, as expressed in the famous Tang Dynasty poems. So the idea behind it was to express the poetic idea of leisurely rhythm, which become only perceptible when a mutual resonance between the viewer's emotion and the view of the waterworks was achieved. Sounds a little bit complicated. Let me explain in detail. So the water was included as an important aspect in a larger vision for gardens as representation of harmony, wonder, and delight. A view intended to be perceived by the emperor sitting on the terrace. So it's not about, what you can see here is not about a European idea of a landscape, part of a territory, but about how a Chinese mental picture, a larger vision for the garden, which is the synthesis of harmony, wonder, and delight, could be expressed, conveyed through the harmonious place of water. So in the Chinese context, a scene is not simply the objective moment of nature captured by the eyes, as in the European case. It's, again, a mental picture, an image imbued with the viewer's emotion, which has to be gained through the viewing and experiencing a landscape. In this case, 40 emotion-evoking Qing occurred through the subjectivity of the emperor, because the emperor wrote 14 poems for 14 Qing views in his garden, together with the objective existence of landscape. So, and adopting this view and the Buddhist vision of rounded brightness, remember the whole garden complex is called Yuan, the garden of rounded brightness. And this is a term adopted from the Buddhist Sutra. So the larger vision of the whole garden complex could only become perceptible to the viewers, regardless who, the emperor or you or I, only when we, the emperor, you or I, were able to see all the 14 separate scenes at once. So each view has a mental picture. In order to gain the larger vision of the building complex, the garden complex of the Buddhist vision, the rounded brightness, you have to go through all 40 single views. And in the process of observing the palace of the harmony, wonder, and delight, which is this one, perception of this competing vision involved a combination of the harmony achieved by the controlled movement of water, the viewer's intuitive feeling, as well as the delights of nature enhanced by viewers' sensorial experiences during the viewing of the scenes, during the viewings of this harmonious place of water. Its mental image, Qing, however, could not be adequately expressed in the engraving, the one that you are seeing on the screen, made by the Qing court in the 1783 and 286. What you are seeing is the European engraving, right? But on the contrary, this European engraving simply captured a picturesque moment rendered with perspective projection with a view from the opposite side of the emperor throne upon water, which just like the fountain in the Kobe optical view becomes a part of landscape. So what you are seeing is a very typical European idea of representing a part of a territory. And the mental image went completely lost. In the second phase of European palaces, the water became monumental, and in at least 3 building complexes was elevated to the unreachable heights. The first one, the curved linear basin with 12 cylindrical bronze animals spouting water jets to the center, which is one that's highlighted here, was situated in front of a calm sea palace, Haiyan, so emphasizing rhythmical and peaceful aspects of the Yellow River, as name indicates. So this palace, the palace of calm seas, still bears a mental image, a vision. Next to this palace, and viewed from the cranes flank the water observing throne, now on the left-hand side, and the grand fountain on the right-hand side, which was constructed in the third phase of this garden complex, contained a European theatrical fountain with 10 bronze hounds spouting streams to a deer and a pair of monumental waterworks in the form of pagoda to its south. I guess you can see here, the 2 pagodas here. In the second example, which is the grand fountain, the Qing, the mental image, the Qing vision, and contrast to the palace of harmony, wonder, and delight, had completely disappeared. Neither its name nor the place of water carry the same level of a vision. It's called simply the grand fountain. What unprecedented here is that water becomes the subject matter of both pictorial and physical representation of, quote, a part of territory, in the words of François Julien, which we might call landscape today. Although the knowledge of European hydraulics were privileged to the court and the mental upper class, using these features as a status symbol to show off their wealth and ability to access European knowledge and curiosities. These waterworks were not unknown to the public, as I have proposed in this talk today. Along with other buildings and views from Qianlong's European palaces, festival stages, temporal buildings, and waterworks were arranged to be exhibited in the public space in Beijing, celebrating Emperor's 18th birthday. It is remarkable that all these fountains here, at the corner here, the 3 fountains, were made in a similar but not identical form to those in the European palaces, and further reproduced the ancient Chinese idea and symbolism of water. It was noting that the monumental painting Buddha's Preaching, Shuifadian, on the right-hand side, by the Qing court painting Ding Wanpeng, who is also a pupil of Jesuit missionary painter at the court, Giuseppe Castiglione, seems to have served as a direct model for the theatrical fountain exhibited during the birthday celebrations. So it was took as most likely as a model, because the Ding Wanpeng also got involved in organizing this temporary stages during the birthday celebration. In its foreground, viewer's attention is drawn to a huge lotus basin surrounded by a balustrade. The fountain structure exceptional. A golden dragon winds around a rock while water jets come out from his mouth here, from its mouth. A similar one can be seen in Ding Guanpeng's another painting, The Word of Infinite Happiness, 极乐世界图, now on the left-hand side, produced as early as 1759. So this date is very important, in which the second phase of European palaces was completed. The structure of these two fountains varies slightly, as you can tell from the images on the screen. The golden dragon in the latter, in the one that dated to 1759, winds around the rock that supports the marble bowl instead in the marble bowl. So this one is in the marble bowl located inside. And here is that the dragon, the golden dragon, winds around a rock and supports the marble bowl. And in this bowl, jets of water bubble out of a crowned sphere, which probably symbolizes the sun. It's different from the one that from the Buddha's preaching. But what's certain, however, is that several elements of the fountain of the palace of harmony, wonder, and delight, such as the shape of the water basin and its multi-storied fountain, were reproduced in Ding Guanpeng's scroll painting of 1759, the Word of Infinite Happiness. So this hexagonal basin was replicated and appended again in the birthday celebration scroll, as we talk in the very beginning of the talk today. Just to conclude, putting the Kobe optical view now on the left-hand side back into its original context, it is evident that European water features were desired both inside and outside the 18th century Qing court, but the popularity was extremely limited, since the mastery of the techniques involving in making them was a privilege of the Jesuit-related upper class, who were the, first of all, the emperor, the court, and the rich merchants. And the celebration of the Qianlong's birthday in the public space obviously provide a unique opportunity of the painter who produced the Kobe optical view. So in the last phase of the European palaces, there is a perspective drawing made in this way, as I just show you here upper right. It's not a real cityscape, but made consisted of several panels in order to create the illusion of the depths. So, and this view was also arranged, according to my research, in the public space of Beijing during the birthday celebration, and was adopted as a foundation for making the Kobe optical views. And then, of course, here combined with place of water that are taken from the same garden compound. In this view, constructed through a European eye, the Taoist and even Buddhist connotations of water, celestial buildings and auspicious animals have again been amalgamated into an integrated picture. So it is not a faithful documentary of something we have seen, but is a culture construction that reflects the ever-present wish for auspiciousness and immortality, claiming an important place in the European concept of landscape, a slightly new mode of human interaction with nature that were not seen previously emphasized in the early Chinese thought. And I will stop here and thank you very much. And what I just presented is based on a chapter published in my book, Jesuit Legacy in Beijing, Sacred Building and Transcultural Spaces, published 2 years ago. And this is book cover here. And below, you can see my contact information for anyone who interested in this topic, or for anyone who didn't attend this talk today, but willing to explore a little bit more about European garden and hydraulics in China. Please feel free to contact me anytime. And I'm looking forward to your responses and critical comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lianming. for a very interesting talk, which is a lot for us to take in, trying to understand the Chinese view as opposed to the European viewer approach. I haven't seen anybody. If anybody would like to write down any comments or any questions, we'd be happy to put them to Ming now. Ming, I just wanted to while you were talking about the Palace of Harmony, what's it called? The Palace of Harmony and wonder, harmony, wonder, and delight. And
Right.
you said that the emperor had these 14 views, that you needed to have look at each of the 14 views in order to have the experience
Right.
of the garden, and it made me it was reminiscent of the Louis XIV and his very specific tour that he had written for people that came to Versailles. I mean, a very different idea approach to it, because that was very linear. However, but he was very certain about how you should go about it. And it sounds like in a similar way, the emperor was very certain about how you went about getting the experience from his garden. Do you think, it was just something that came to mind. Pippa has put a question here. Were there any other sources of inspiration than Bruckner for the Jesuits?
Oh, okay. Michael, if you don't mind, I will start with your comment. Okay. So currently, there is a small group of scholars in the world, scattered different parts of the world, in the US and in the UK as well, particularly in London, in the hope that Chinese art history as well as non-European art could be taught within a broader context of global art history. So in the context of long 18th century, including Stephen Whitman, who recently published a very inspiring work. I wrote a review of it, which will come out in the following months, entitled "Where Dragon Veins Meet: The Emperor Kangxi's Mountain Estate in Rehe," which also recapitulates the idea of Louis XIV, what you just said, which is very similar to the 14 views of the Garden of the Rounded Brightness. The garden, of course, Kangxi was a grandfather of Qianlong. So there are 3 generations of the Qing imperial family engaged very actively in constructing imperial landscapes, political landscapes. So Kangxi Emperor was the first generation. And he also wrote 36 views for his 36 scenic sites in his mountain estate, which is a summer resort, not in the capital of Qing, not in Beijing, but about 150 miles away from the capital, when he did hunting and resorts in summer. So this is something very interesting. It's not only occurred in the Chinese context, but just as you said, brings me to the point that it is actually a global phenomenon in the long 18th century. So garden is not occurred in the secluded places. So they are emerged actually in the connected histories. So many of the views and paintings and pictorial representation of the 36th view of Kangxi Emperor, as well as those engraving I just showed you in my talk, were made and inspired by European technologies and European, for example, particularly Jesuit mapping and surveying technologies. So the 18th century is a connected, the word is connected, so connected. So the main idea behind it is to teach and write the garden history within a long connected 18th centuries. So that is the currently tendency in the field of garden history, as far as I understood, because Stephen Whitman, which is an outstanding scholar in this field, he also gave a talk about teaching 18th century garden. So it's not a comment, but just let you know that I'm personally also very interested in these connectivities and try to get rid of the Eurocentralism, at the same time also Sino-Centurism. The 18th century was a connected, a period of connectivity indeed. And back to Pipa's question, were there any sources of inspiration than booklets for the Jesuits? Yes. There are several different kinds of treatises, but particularly published in Italy and in Nuremberg in Germany of the 17th century, have been brought to the Jesuit libraries in Beijing. There were two of them. One belonged to the Portuguese, another one belonged to the French Jesuits in Beijing. One is, I forgot the title of the book, was published by one garden treatise was published by Ferrari, Italian garden theorist of the Renaissance, showing some designs of parterre garden, some designs, geometric forms of the Renaissance garden and the garden à la Française, which is in French styles. And this treatise was on view in one of the, we don't know which one, but in one of these two Jesuit libraries in Beijing in the 18th century. And the second one is booklet. Booklet was very famous, and there were, and there still are, I think, a Latin translation as well as an Italian version available in the Jesuit garden and now kept in the manuscript department of the National Library in China. But currently, I think they are not accessible because the National Libraries are planning to do kind of new publication. So, but at least these two treatises were available in the Jesuit libraries. But for constructing the European palaces, including the European palaces of the Qianlong Emperor, there were other garden treatises being consulted. I can barely remember all the name of it, but there is an article by Zhou Hui, published several years ago, with a brief list of the treatises that made available and became available to the Jesuit architects and the Chinese as well in the 18th century. There are about, according to my calculation, 5 to 7 books were available in the Qing court. But we don't know how this book was used, because some of the palaces and gardens were designed simply by Jesuit Jean-Denis Attiret, for example, by himself, and some of them directly adopted and taken from the European sources instead of the books. So they're very, very complicated. There are different channels of knowledge exchange and personal exchange as well. Yes, I hope I answered Pipa's question. And I guess there is a second one.
Yeah, well, we've got a couple more questions now. One from Tai Kong. Could you please further explain how Jesuit hydrology is relevant to Chinese cosmological ideas? I'm also interested in your definition of cosmology or cosmological vision. Thank you.
Oh, sure. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't say that Jesuit hydrology is relevant to Chinese cosmological ideas. But the main idea behind the displays of water and water devices in China was to show the auspiciousness and pursuing of immortality and the cosmological setting of the Chinese idea, the world order as well. So the Jesuit hydrology, according to my research, only had given the major technical impetus to achieving this. So the Chinese idea remained unchanged from the 2nd BCE to the 18th century BC, within this period. It never changed. But the Jesuit hydrology helped and facilitate the Qing Emperor to establishing in the Qing political landscape through the place of water, because this is the only place with European place of water. And I didn't mention in my talk, and it's very interesting to know that the occasion to see all this place of water is to receive foreign envoys, including the British envoy in 1792 and 93. So to show that the emperor, the Manchu emperor, did have access to the privileged knowledge from Europe as a place to show off the wealth and the access to the distant world. That's a major point about it. Actually, the Qing emperors, the Manchus, they did not interested in what's going on in Europe. They don't care about it. They only care about it, how to achieving the Chinese idea, the Chinese way of showing the proofs of heaven, the science of heaven, the control of the water, and how prosperity his country is through or by using the European and Jesuit knowledge. That's the main point about it. So I in many occasions, I did talk about the relation between the Jesuit and Jesuit knowledge and the Qing court. My main point about it is not to use the word influence. So the Europeans and European knowledge, as well as the Jesuit knowledge, Jesuit treaties, garden treaty, they never impacted China. They never impacted the Qing Manchu court, vice versa. The Chinese emperor, the Qing Manchu emperor, they utilized, instrumentalized the European idea for achieving their own imagery, critical narratives, and for imagining his own world order. It's very Sino-centric as opposed to the Eurocentric idea of, for example, the August Strong of the 18th century. So I hope I answered your question. And I'd like to turn into the next one, if you don't mind.
Yes, well, that's a very, very interesting, your explanation there. Melissa Hay asks, Qianlong Gardens in Beijing has a courtyard just beyond the entrance with a simple rectangular pool with a balustrade surrounding it. This has only a very beautiful white rock in the center as a center ornament reflected in the still water. I found this very moving piece of landscaping. This predates the more ornamental water features he built later. Are there any other examples?
Unfortunately, according to my knowledge, this is the only example. This is the only example that we can still see in the sources. So there are no further example that, according to my research, is very unfortunate. I think there's only one in Beijing, and in Zhehe, in Chengde, which is about 150 miles away from Beijing. The main focus of that landscape was not put on water during the Qianlong period. Of course, in the Kangxi period, which is the 17th century, water did play the important role in achieving and displaying the Qing political landscape. But in the case of Qianlong, this is a very unique and single example, I have to say.
Thank you. And then Sonia says, could you please give the name again of the person who wrote the article naming books available in the Jesuit library?
Oh, sure. Sonia, if you don't mind, just type the name Zhou Hui. And he is an associate professor of landscape and a very famous garden theorist of Chinese garden. And he wrote a book entitled A Jesuit Garden in Beijing, but his main focus was paid to the 40 views of the Yuanmingyuan garden instead of European palaces. But Zhou Hui published an article on the Jing vision, the mental picture of the Chinese garden landscape. So in that article, there is an appendix with all titles of the books that were used or available, made available to the Jesuit in the 18th century. look for his name, Zhou Hui or Hui Zhou, and you will find the article that he published.
Right. Well, I think I don't see any other questions. Anybody else have another question? There don't seem to be another one then, Ming. So I think that concludes the questions this evening. We just thank you very, very much for a very fantastically interesting investigation there. It expands the very Eurocentric mind, I think, listening to what you have to say. Thank you again, and thank everyone for coming. I'd like to remind you that the last seminar of this term will be in 2 weeks' time on the 31st of March. And Nabayat Avigulu will be talking about Turkey in the landscape garden. So Turkery in the landscape garden. So and that will conclude our seminars for the term. So again, thank you, and hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Just for anyone who is interested in the topic, please feel free to contact me, writing email to Lianming Wang at ZO University Heidelberg. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Good, thank you.